It was supposed to be a quiet return home after 15 days in the hospital. My son had promised to take care of everything: the bills, the house, the garden. I trusted him completely. But when I stood at my own front door, he looked more surprised than happy. "You're early," he said, blocking the entrance for a moment too long. Behind him, I heard voices. A woman's laughter, footsteps, the sound of a drawer closing. Something was wrong. I'd come home to rest. Instead, I walked into a plan that had already started without me. When I stepped through the front gate, I could already sense something was wrong. The air that once smelled of home, of soil, jasmine, and coffee, now carried a faint perfume I didn't recognize. I had just come back from 15 days in the hospital. My body still ached from the surgery, but my heart felt steady. I was ready to rest, to heal in my own bed, surrounded by my own things. I expected my son to smile when he opened the door. Instead, he froze, as if I had interrupted something. His expression wasn't relief. It was shock. He said, "You're early," his voice uncertain, his eyes darting behind me, as though worried someone else might see. I stood there, holding my hospital bag, my hands trembling slightly from the cold. I noticed the curtains were different. The lace ones I'd washed every month were gone, replaced with heavy beige drapes that didn't belong to me. My plants on the porch were dry, brown, and dying. I'd left instructions to water them every 2 days. The doormat was new too, printed with a phrase I would never choose: "Welcome home. Make yourself comfortable." It didn't feel like a welcome. It felt like a warning. Inside, things were worse. My husband's old armchair, the one he used to sit in every evening, was missing. In its place was a modern white couch, the kind my son's wife had once said looked more expensive. The family photos that used to line the hallway were gone, replaced by abstract paintings that meant nothing to me. Even the smell of food was different. It wasn't my cooking. It was the kind of overly spiced, restaurant-style meal that filled the room with someone. It was supposed to be a quiet return home after 15 days in the hospital. My son had promised to take care of everything: the bills, the house, the garden. I trusted him completely. But when I stood at my own front door, he looked more surprised than happy. "You're early," he said, blocking the entrance for a moment too long. Behind him, I heard voices. A woman's laughter, footsteps, the sound of a drawer closing. Something was wrong. I'd come home to rest. Instead, I walked into a plan that had already started without me. When I stepped through the front gate, I could already sense something was wrong. The air that once smelled of home, of soil, jasmine, and coffee, now carried a faint perfume I didn't recognize. I had just come back from 15 days in the hospital. My body still ached from the surgery, but my heart felt steady. I was ready to rest, to heal in my own bed, surrounded by my own things. I expected my son to smile when he opened the door. Instead, he froze, as if I had interrupted something. His expression wasn't relief. It was shock. He said, "You're early," his voice uncertain, his eyes darting behind me, as though worried someone else might see. I stood there, holding my hospital bag, my hands trembling slightly from the cold. I noticed the curtains were different. The lace ones I'd washed every month were gone, replaced with heavy beige drapes that didn't belong to me. My plants on the porch were dry, brown, and dying. I'd left instructions to water them every 2 days. The doormat was new too, printed with a phrase I would never choose: "Welcome home. Make yourself comfortable." It didn't feel like a welcome. It felt like a warning. Inside, things were worse. My husband's old armchair, the one he used to sit in every evening, was missing. In its place was a modern white couch, the kind my son's wife had once said looked more expensive. The family photos that used to line the hallway were gone, replaced by abstract paintings that meant nothing to me. Even the smell of food was different. It wasn't my cooking. It was the kind of overly spiced, restaurant-style meal that filled the room with someone else's scent. I felt like I had entered a stranger's home. My son kept talking, trying to sound casual. He said he had been cleaning, rearranging, making things easier for me. But the more he spoke, the less it sounded like care. His words stumbled over themselves, and every sentence ended too quickly, like he was rushing me through the space that used to be mine. I saw 2 mugs on the counter, both half full, still warm. The dishes were for 2 people. There was a woman's scarf hanging on the coat rack, one I'd never seen before. A perfume lingered in the air, strong and unfamiliar. I didn't ask whose it was. I didn't need to. I went to the living room. My cushions were gone. My handmade tablecloth had been folded away. On the coffee table lay a magazine that didn't belong to me, Luxury Homes Weekly. Its pages were folded around an article titled, "How to Flip Old Properties Fast." I didn't read further. My stomach turned. Then upstairs I heard it. A woman's laugh. Loud, careless, echoing down the staircase. The sound froze me where I stood. A man's voice followed, low but clear. My son flinched. "Friends," he said quickly. "Just friends staying for a few days." His words were too sharp, too prepared. My hands clutched the hospital papers I still carried. I felt smaller than I had in that hospital bed. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that after all I'd done, after all I'd given, he wouldn't lie to me in my own house. But then my eyes moved to the mantelpiece. It had always been the heart of my home, a line of framed photographs from my wedding day to my grandchildren's birthdays. Every single one was gone. The shelves were bare. In their place, a single new frame stood, a glossy picture of my son and his wife, smiling in front of my house with the words, "Our new beginning." That's when it hit me. The house didn't feel wrong because I'd been gone. It felt wrong because someone had already replaced me. The laughter upstairs wasn't just visitors. It was ownership. My husband's armchair was gone, my photos removed, my plants dead. My furniture changed. My son's shock at seeing me wasn't from concern. It was from realizing I had returned too soon. I stood quietly for a long moment, my eyes fixed on that picture frame. My son tried to say something again, but I barely heard him. My heart had gone numb, the kind of numb that only comes from betrayal, not pain. I picked up my bag and walked slowly toward my room, my footsteps heavy on the cold tiles. Behind me, I could still hear the woman's laughter, the sound of someone settling into a life that wasn't theirs. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to, because in that silence, I already knew. While I was in the hospital fighting for my health, my son had been fighting for my house, and now I had come home too early for his plans to finish. Before the surgery, I wasn't afraid of pain. What scared me was leaving things unfinished: the bills, the garden, the house that had carried my life for 50 years. My son had assured me he'd handle everything. He told me not to worry, that I should focus on recovery. He said he'd water the plants, feed the cat, and make sure my mail didn't pile up. I believed him. I believed him because he was my son, and because I thought trust still meant something in a family. The doctors had called it a routine operation, but at my age, nothing feels routine. I spent 15 days in that hospital room, surrounded by white walls and quiet machines. Every morning, I'd picture my home, the smell of polished wood, the ticking of the old clock my husband fixed every winter, the sound of birds outside the kitchen window. I held on to those thoughts because they reminded me who I was before the illness began to take pieces of me. Every day my son called, or so I thought. Short conversations, quick updates. "Everything's fine, Mum," he'd say. "Rest, don't stress." His tone was always rushed, but I told myself he was busy managing my things. He never visited, saying the hospital air made him uneasy. I accepted that too. I didn't want to burden him. I didn't want to believe that absence could mean something else. The nurses were kind. They said I had a strong heart. I told them it was my son who gave me strength, that I was lucky to have someone dependable. I even smiled when I said it. I didn't know that while I was recovering, my trust was becoming the tool he used to build his own plans. My husband and I had built that house from nothing. Every wall held a story. He was a builder, and I handled the accounts. We paid off every loan ourselves. When he passed, I promised to keep the home safe for our son. I didn't realize safe would one day mean in his name. The illness had made me tired. I didn't want to deal with papers or property anymore, so before I went into surgery, I handed him everything: my bank cards, house documents, and identification. I said, "Just in case something happens." He nodded, calm and confident. I took that as love. But in reality, it was opportunity. The night before surgery, I remember lying awake in the hospital bed, looking at the ceiling, imagining him at home. I pictured him opening the windows to let in the morning light, turning on the radio, maybe even cleaning the living room. That picture gave me peace. I told myself he'd take care of everything, just like his father once did. I didn't know I was imagining a stranger. The nurses said I healed quickly. I told them I had something to go home to. My family, my memories, my son. Every step of my recovery was for that reunion. I wanted to sit on my porch again, feel the morning breeze, sip tea from my chipped blue mug. That was the dream that carried me through the pain. But the truth was that every day I spent recovering, my home was changing. While I counted days, he counted signatures. While I imagined sitting by the garden, he was signing documents behind closed doors. He had learned how to move fast and quiet, the kind of speed that comes from greed, not urgency. The day the doctor said I could go home, I smiled. I called my son. His reaction was strange. He hesitated, then said, "You're being discharged already?" His tone wasn't relief. It was surprise. I brushed it off. I was too happy to notice. I packed slowly, thanking the nurses, waving goodbye to the ward that had become a second home. I didn't realize I was walking out healed in body, but already wounded in trust. As I sat in the taxi heading home, I looked out the window at the city passing by. It felt different, like I'd been gone for months, not days. My heart beat faster with each turn closer to my street. I imagined the porch light glowing, my son waiting with a smile. Instead, when I arrived, the porch was dark. The curtains were drawn. And when I knocked, he opened the door not with warmth, but with surprise. That was the moment everything inside me changed. The person who had left for the hospital was a mother who trusted blindly. The one standing at the door was a woman who finally understood that trust can be dangerous when given to the wrong hands. The next morning, I woke early. still trying to adjust to being home again. My body felt weak, but my mind was sharper than it had been in weeks. I went to the kitchen to make tea. The cupboards had been rearranged. The cups I always kept on the left were now on the right. Small things, but small things tell stories. Someone had been living differently in my house. I brushed it off, telling myself my son probably just wanted to clean up. But deep down, something didn't feel right. Then I heard it. A woman's laughter upstairs. It wasn't faint or accidental. It was clear, casual, and familiar, like someone laughing in their own home. I froze. The sound came again, followed by a man's low voice. My son's voice. They were talking about something. Maybe breakfast. Maybe plans. I couldn't make out the words. What I could feel was the weight of being a stranger in my own home. I looked around the sitting room. There were clothes I didn't recognize. A jacket too small to be my son's. Shoes with pointed toes near the door. A woman's purse on the armchair. On the coffee table were 2 empty glasses and a half-eaten sandwich. My house didn't look like a home. It looked like someone else's living space. I walked closer to the mantel. My family photos were gone. The framed picture of my husband holding our baby son. Gone. The wedding photo. Gone. Even the simple photo of my garden in spring was missing. In their place were decorations I'd never seen before. Shiny ornaments, artificial flowers, and a large candle that smelled like cheap perfume. My chest tightened. It was as if someone had tried to erase my life from the walls. I called my son's name. He came downstairs, his face pale. He started talking fast, explaining things I hadn't asked. "They're just friends, Mum," he said quickly. "They needed a place for a few days while their flat gets renovated." He said it too smoothly, too easily. Behind him, I heard the woman laugh again, but softer now, as if she knew she was being listened to. I didn't reply. I just nodded slowly. I went to the dining room. My husband's old wooden chair was missing, the one he used every evening. I ran my fingers along the table. It was scratched. There was a new vase in the center, tall and glassy, full of fake white lilies. I hated fake flowers. My son knew that. I had told him once. Real flowers die, but at least they're honest. Looked down at the floor. My rug, the one I bought with my first month's pension, was rolled up in the corner, replaced by a patterned carpet I'd never seen before. Everything about the house felt heavier, colder, foreign. Even the light looked different, duller, as if the home itself didn't want to recognize me anymore. Later that afternoon, I went to unpack. My bedroom door was open, but something felt off there too. The bedding had been changed. My blanket was missing. My wardrobe smelled of a stranger's perfume. There were new hangers, new clothes. Someone else's life quietly woven into mine. My jewelry box, the one my husband gifted me on our 25th anniversary, had been moved from the dresser to the nightstand. I opened it. 2 pieces were missing, the gold chain he gave me and the small diamond ring I never wore outside. I sat down on the bed, breathing slowly. I told myself not to panic, not yet. Maybe they had moved things while cleaning. Maybe I was imagining it. But then I saw the photo frame on my bedside table. It wasn't my family photo. It was a picture of my son and his wife, smiling in front of my house. The same one that had been on the living room mantel. Beneath the photo, in a new silver frame, were the words, "Our forever home." I didn't speak. I didn't cry. I didn't even move. I just sat there, realizing that while I was in a hospital bed, fighting for my life, someone had already decided that my life was no longer mine. My illness had made me vulnerable, and my vulnerability had made me easy to replace. That night, as I lay awake, I heard voices again. They were laughing, watching television in the living room. My son wasn't laughing the way he used to. His laughter sounded forced, nervous, but hers was free, careless, confident. It was the sound of someone comfortable in a place that didn't belong to her. I stared at the ceiling until morning, unable to close my eyes. Every sound in the house, every whisper, every footstep, reminded me that I was no longer the woman who owned this home. I was just the guest who had come back too early. That night, I decided to stay quiet. Sometimes silence tells you more than shouting ever could. I pretended to be tired, ate a little soup, and said I needed rest. My son seemed relieved, as if he was glad I wasn't asking questions. But I was watching everything. The house had changed, and not just in decoration. It had changed in ownership. After everyone went to sleep, I tried to enter my study. The small room I used for keeping documents, bills, and personal things. I turned the handle gently. It didn't move. I reached for my keys, the same ones I'd carried for years, and slid one into the lock. It didn't fit. I tried again, harder this time, but the keyhole was different. My heart sank. Someone had changed it. I stood in that hallway for a long moment, staring at the closed door. My hands trembled. My study wasn't just a room. It was where my life's papers were stored. The house deed, my savings accounts, my husband's letters, even the insurance documents. Everything that proved I had built something real. Everything that tied me to this house. Now it was locked behind a door I couldn't open. I turned away, trying to steady my breathing. I didn't want to wake anyone. As I walked down the corridor, I noticed more small things. The family clock that used to hang by the stairs, gone. My favorite lamp, gone. The small cupboard near the dining area, locked too. It felt like my home was closing its doors to me one by one. The next morning, I looked for my jewelry box. It had always been on my dresser, right beside the mirror. When I opened the drawer, the box was gone. I searched everywhere, under the bed, inside the wardrobe, until finally, I found it half hidden under some clothes in the wardrobe corner. I opened it. The gold chain my husband gave me was missing. So was my wedding ring, which I had stopped wearing after he passed but always kept safe. I walked to the living room. My son was drinking coffee, scrolling through his phone. I looked at him, and he avoided my eyes. He said something meaningless about needing to sort out some paperwork later. His tone was flat, rehearsed. I nodded, but said nothing. By noon, I decided to check the drawers in my bedside table. That's where I always kept important letters, my bank statements, pension slips, and the property deed. When I opened the drawer, my papers were gone. In their place were magazines and an empty envelope. The label from the bank was still inside, but the actual letter was missing. I felt my chest tighten. My fingers went cold. I had trusted him completely before going to the hospital. I'd left everything in his care. And now, piece by piece, my life was being removed from under me. That evening, I asked him casually about the property papers. He said, "You don't need to worry about those, Mom. I'm handling it all." He smiled faintly, as if saying something kind. But the words were wrong. They weren't meant to comfort me. They were meant to silence me. When people tell you not to worry, they usually mean don't look. And I knew I had to look. After he left the house later that night, I searched quietly. I went to his room. Inside his desk drawer was a small envelope addressed to the local bank. The date was from last week, while I was still in the hospital. I unfolded the paper. It mentioned a pending property transfer request with my home's address listed clearly. My name was printed once, not as the owner, but as the previous holder. I sat there for a long time, holding the paper. My eyes didn't water. I'd already cried enough in life, for my husband, for my youth, for the moments lost to disappointment. Now I felt something colder, sharper, betrayal without apology. I took the envelope, slipped it into my pocket, and went back to my room. On the bedside table sat my old phone. I unlocked it, scrolled through my contacts, and stopped at one name: Mr. Clark. Lawyer. He'd handled my husband's estate years ago. I hadn't spoken to him in over a decade. But trust, once earned, doesn't fade. The next morning, while my son was out, I called him. My voice didn't shake. I told him I needed to meet. He agreed immediately, recognizing the seriousness in my tone. Before hanging up, he asked, "Is this about your husband's documents?" I paused for a moment, then said, "No, it's about mine." As I ended the call, I looked around my room. Every corner of my house suddenly felt like a stranger's possession. My son had changed the locks, moved my things, and taken my papers. But what he didn't realize was that you can't change the locks on truth. That morning, I packed a small bag, slipped the paper envelope inside, and whispered to myself, "If he's handling everything, let him handle what comes next." The morning was quiet, but not peaceful. The air in my home felt heavy, like the silence before a storm. I sat at my table, a cup of tea untouched beside me, thinking about the missing papers, the changed locks, and the lies I'd swallowed in the name of motherhood. My son had said I didn't need to worry. But mothers don't stop worrying, especially when something doesn't make sense. I started with the one place he might have overlooked: my bedside drawer. That's where I'd always kept small things: my reading glasses, a photo of my husband, and the folder that held my most important documents. I opened the drawer slowly. The folder was gone. In its place was a stack of random receipts and a few unpaid utility bills. None of it belonged there. It was a cover, a lazy one. I reached deeper and felt a single sheet of paper tucked underneath. It was a letter from my bank, one of those printed notices they send for large transactions. The letter was dated 10 days ago. I had been in the hospital at that time. The words were clear: transfer approved, amount $85,000, signature verified. My signature. I read it again. The ink looked fresh in the photocopy, but the handwriting wasn't mine. It was close, practiced, maybe traced. My chest tightened. I remembered handing him my documents before the operation. He had used them all: my ID, my checkbook, even my medical discharge papers, to make himself look legitimate. While I lay under hospital lights, he had been using my name. I placed the letter on the table and stared at it for a long time. The betrayal was heavy, but quiet. Not a sudden stab, more like a slow suffocation. There were no screams, no shouts, just silence and signatures. When he came home that afternoon, he was cheerful, too cheerful. He carried a new set of keys, tossed them onto the counter, and asked if I was feeling stronger. I told him I was. He smiled and said, "Good. Don't overthink anything. I've got everything handled." Then he left again. The sound of the front door closing behind him was the only thing real in that moment. I waited until he drove away. Then I picked up the phone and called my lawyer, Mr. Clark. He answered on the second ring. His voice was the same, calm, professional, a voice that dealt in facts, not emotions. I told him briefly that my house papers were missing and that my son had access to everything. He didn't sound surprised. "Bring whatever you can find," he said. "We'll trace the rest." That night, I searched through every corner of my house. I found bank slips, photocopies, torn envelopes, small pieces of proof scattered like breadcrumbs. Together, they painted a clear picture. My son had transferred money, forged signatures, and changed property access. But one thing he hadn't realized was that the original deed, the only document that could truly transfer ownership, was still registered in my maiden name. That meant any transfer without my verified approval would raise questions. By the next morning, I had everything gathered into a neat file. I felt old, yes, but not weak. I had been blind for 15 days. Now I was wide awake. When I reached the lawyer's office, he looked at the documents and frowned. He recognized my husband's signature on some papers, old and familiar, but next to it, in fresh ink, was my name forged beside my son's. "He didn't just try to take the money," Mr. Clark said quietly. "He tried to take the foundation, the property itself." He advised me not to confront him directly yet. Instead, he suggested a trace through the property department and the bank's fraud unit. Everything would be recorded quietly, without alerting him. I agreed. I didn't want another scene of tears or explanations. I wanted truth. That night, I came home exhausted but determined. My son greeted me at the door again, pretending normalcy. I noticed something in his pocket, a folded envelope with the bank's logo. He slipped it away quickly, thinking I hadn't seen it. I smiled politely, nodded, and went straight to my room. I sat on my bed, opened my small notebook, and wrote down everything: dates, times, details. Every lie, every missing item, every transaction. When I closed it, I felt calm. The kind of calm that doesn't come from peace, but from knowing the next move belongs to you. Before sleeping, I looked at the hospital wristband. I still hadn't removed. 15 days I spent healing my body, while my son spent those same 15 days stripping away my life. But now the roles had changed. He didn't know it yet, but I was about to take back everything, not with anger, but with evidence. The next morning, my lawyer called. He'd checked the records. The property documents had been sent for transfer, but they hadn't been approved yet. My forged signature was under review. If I acted fast, I could stop it. I thanked him quietly and hung up. Then I looked around my house, my furniture, my husband's chair, my memories. I whispered to myself, "You wanted to handle everything, didn't you, son? Then handle this." 2 days later, I received a call from Mr. Clark. His voice was steady but cold, the kind of tone lawyers use when they're about to tell you something you can't unhear. He said the property department had confirmed what we feared. My son had submitted ownership transfer documents. The deed had been sent with a forged signature, along with a witness form signed by a man I didn't know. I felt a wave of nausea, but not from sickness, from betrayal. My son had moved faster than I expected. He told the officials that I was too unwell to manage my affairs and had consented to the transfer in his care. It was believable on paper. I had been hospitalized, sedated for days, my condition documented. The perfect excuse for him to build a lie around. He'd turned my weakness into paperwork. I didn't cry. I just sat there, listening to every word, letting it settle like cold stone in my chest. Mr. Clark didn't stop there. He went on to explain that the couple living upstairs weren't friends at all. They were a realtor and his wife. They had been negotiating a private sale, thinking they were dealing with the rightful owner, my son. He had already shown them plans, valuations, and even discussed renovation details. They had paid a deposit. I wasn't just being replaced in my own home. I was being sold out of it. When I hung up, I didn't move for several minutes. The house was quiet, but I could hear faint voices upstairs. The same couple laughing, walking around freely. I looked at the ceiling and felt something deep inside me harden. My son had chosen money over me. That kind of decision isn't a mistake. It's a choice made coldly, with calculation. That evening, when he returned home, I watched him closely. He avoided my eyes again, his tone overly kind. He brought groceries, asked if I was feeling stronger, even suggested I rest more. It was the performance of a man trying to keep control. But I had already seen the truth. After dinner, he went to the study, the one he had locked from me. I watched him take calls from the hallway, his voice low but firm. I caught a few words. Buyer, clear by Friday, and papers ready. My blood ran cold. He was finalizing the sale. My house, my life, was now just a transaction to him. When he went to sleep, I moved quietly. I took my phone, opened the voice recorder, and began capturing everything. His calls, his words, the strangers in my house. All of it. Every lie he told became evidence. I took photos too. The replaced locks, the missing jewelry, the realtor's personal items. Each click of the camera was like reclaiming a small piece of what he stole. The next morning, I called Mr. Clark again and sent him everything. The recordings, the photos, even a copy of the bank letter. He didn't speak much, just said one line before hanging up. Keep acting like nothing's wrong. We'll handle it. For the next few days, I did exactly that. I stayed quiet. I smiled when I had to. I pretended to nap while they whispered upstairs. I listened, memorized, and collected proof. Every moment of silence became part of my plan. By the fourth day, the lawyer had enough to act. He confirmed through the property registrar that my son's application for transfer hadn't been completed. One verification document was still missing, a health declaration from me. That was the crack in his plan. Without it, nothing could legally proceed. And once authorities were informed of the forgery, everything would turn against him. That night, as I sat alone in the kitchen, I looked at my husband's empty chair and whispered to myself that the house would stay ours. He had built it for our family, not for greed. My son had forgotten that, but I hadn't. The next morning, I looked out the window and saw the realtor couple leaving with boxes. They were moving fast, probably because Mr. Clark had already called them through legal channels. Their faces were pale, like people who had realized they were part of something illegal without knowing it. My son came downstairs later, looking unsettled. He asked if anyone had called. I said no. He nodded, uneasy. He was starting to feel the ground shift under him. He didn't know it yet, but his perfect crime had already started falling apart. I went to my room and sat by the window, watching the afternoon light stretch across the floor. My body was still weak, but my mind was sharper than ever. He thought I was an old woman who wouldn't notice a few missing papers. But I was a mother who had buried a husband, raised a son, and lived long enough to know when something was being taken. He'd already sold the home I hadn't even left yet. But what he didn't know was that I'd just sold his lies to the law. I woke up early the next morning, before the sun had even risen. The house was still, but I could hear faint footsteps upstairs. My son moving about quietly. I stayed in bed, pretending to sleep, while my mind worked faster than it had in years. I had spent my whole life trusting people, especially family. That trust had been my weakness, but now it was going to be my weapon. I realized I didn't need to fight him with anger or tears. I just needed proof. The kind that spoke louder than emotions. The kind that could survive in front of a judge. My lawyer had already started the process of freezing the property transfer, but he needed stronger evidence to make it undeniable. That meant every lie, every move, every signature had to be recorded. So I began my plan, not as a mother, but as a witness. When my son came down for breakfast, I had my phone recording quietly in my dressing gown pocket. I asked harmless questions about the bank, about the friends upstairs, about the documents he had been handling. Each answer was smooth and well-practiced, but also inconsistent. He slipped several times mentioning buyers, final papers, and dates. Every word was evidence. After he left, I searched the house again. I checked under his bed, behind the bookshelf, inside drawers. In his study, I found a folder labeled House Revaluation. Inside were photos of my home, recent inspection reports, and a sale estimate from an estate agent. He had planned everything to look professional, clean, legal, respectable. But one document changed everything. A scanned copy of my passport with a forged signature at the bottom. I took a photo of it and sent it to Mr. Clark with a simple message. It's time. That night, I played along. I smiled when he spoke, nodded when he lied, and thanked him for taking care of things. He looked satisfied, like a thief who thought the door had been left open for him. The following day, the young couple, the realtor and his wife, returned with boxes. They were moving out quietly. I overheard them arguing upstairs. The tone was panicked. I caught fragments of their words. Police? Mistake. Forged. My lawyer must have contacted them already. I stayed out of sight. The less they saw of me, the better. Once they were gone, I walked through the upper floor and inspected what they had left behind. Empty coffee cups, brochures for luxury remodeling, and one small flash drive on the nightstand. I plugged it into my computer later that evening. It contained scanned documents, including the fake property transfer form with my signature pasted in. That was the final piece. Every minute after that, I felt my confidence return. For the first time in weeks, I was not scared. I was ready. The next morning, I called Mr. Clark again and gave him a rundown of everything I'd collected. He told me not to confront my son yet, not until the authorities were ready. I agreed. My role was simple now. Act weak, act unaware, let him think I was still healing. So I did. I spent the next few days pretending to be tired. I moved slowly, spoke softly, and let him believe I was fading. He became careless. One evening, he left his phone on the table while he went outside to take a call. I saw his screen light up. A message from an unknown number. Final payment received. Documents ready for transfer. I took a photo of that, too. By now, I had everything. The recordings, the photos, the forged documents, even the messages. All neatly stored and sent to my lawyer's office. I had become my own investigator, my own protector. The final step came 3 days later when I received a call from the property registrar. They confirmed they had been instructed by my lawyer to suspend all ownership changes pending investigation. The The forged signatures were flagged for review. My house was safe, at least for now. That evening, as I sat in the living room, I looked around at my walls, the photos, the furniture, the curtains I'd sewn myself years ago. Everything looked the same, but everything had changed. My son thought my illness had made me fragile. He didn't realize it had only made me patient. I had been silent long enough. Now my silence had become my loudest statement. Pain had taught me endurance. Betrayal had taught me clarity. And now evidence would teach him consequence. The next morning, I sent one last message to Mr. Clark. Proceed with everything. He replied with just 2 words. It's time. It happened on a Thursday morning, the day everything turned. The house was quiet, sunlight slipping through half-drawn curtains. I sat in my chair, pretending to read, while my son walked around with his phone glued to his ear. He was nervous, pacing, waiting for a call that would never come. The buyers had gone silent, and the bank had frozen the transfer. His plan was crumbling, but he didn't know that I had built the cracks myself. At exactly 9 o'clock, the sound of car doors outside broke the stillness. 2 men in suits and 1 police officer stood at the gate. My son went to the window and frowned. I saw confusion on his face, the kind that comes when a thief realizes the lock has changed. He turned to me and said something about official business, then opened the door. The lawyer, Mr. Clark, stepped in first. His tone was calm, professional, and firm. The police followed, carrying a folder full of printed evidence. They asked to speak in the living room. I didn't move from my chair. I just watched. The moment my son saw the documents, his face lost all color. On the table lay every piece of evidence I had gathered. The recordings, the bank letters, the photos of the forged deeds, even the realtor's deposit slips. The police officer read from his file: fraudulent transfer attempt, identity forgery, and unauthorized property sale. My son started talking fast, trying to explain, saying it was a misunderstanding. But the evidence was solid. The signatures, the transactions, the witness forms, all connected back to him. Mr. Clark didn't say much. He simply placed another paper in front of my son, a court order freezing all assets under his name until the investigation ended. My son's hands trembled as he read it. The reality began to sink in. The young couple, the so-called temporary guests, arrived minutes later. They walked in nervously, carrying bags. The police questioned them, too. They admitted my son had promised them ownership once the paperwork cleared. He'd taken a large advance payment. Their lawyer had already warned them the deal was fake. The woman started crying. The man just stared at the floor. It was chaos, quiet, polite chaos, the kind that smells like guilt. Through all of it, I said nothing. I didn't need to. My presence was enough. My son finally turned towards me, his voice shaking, asking me to say something. I looked at him, not as a mother, but as a person who had been robbed in her own home. I wanted to ask him why, to understand how a child could steal from the hand that raised him. But I already knew the answer. Greed, entitlement. He had mistaken my love for weakness. The police gathered the remaining documents, sealing them in evidence envelopes. Mr. Clark signed a few final papers and handed me a copy of the injunction. My house was legally protected now. No sale, no transfer, no claim could move forward without my written consent. The home that had been turned into a crime scene was finally mine again, not just by memory, but by law. When the officers asked if I wanted to press charges, I nodded. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about consequence. If I had let it go, he would have done the same thing to someone else. Maybe even to his own wife one day. Some lessons can't be taught with forgiveness. They need paperwork. As the officers led him out, he turned once more, eyes red, voice low. He said he didn't mean for it to go this far, but it had gone exactly as far as he chose to take it. I didn't reply. The door closed behind them, and the sound echoed through the house. The sound of a mother's trust finally locking itself shut. When the silence returned, I stood slowly and walked to the mantelpiece. My photos were still gone. He had boxed them away somewhere. I went to the storage room, found the box, and placed each photo back in its place. My husband's portrait, my wedding day, my son's childhood picture, all back where they belonged. I took a deep breath and sat down. For the first time in months, the air felt clean again. He had said he'd take care of everything. He did, just not the way he planned. The police had taken care of him instead. That night I slept without locking my door. For the first time in years, I didn't have to protect my home from my own blood. The fear was gone. The anger was fading. What remained was something stronger, peace built on truth. The day after the police took my son away, the house felt unnaturally quiet. No footsteps on the stairs, no phones ringing, no murmurs of secret calls, just the sound of the old clock ticking on the wall. Steady, calm, and familiar. It had been 15 days since I left for the hospital, and yet it felt like I had returned from another lifetime. Everything looked the same, but it carried the weight of betrayal. The curtains, the table, even the walls seemed to remember the lies that had been spoken within them. I started the morning by opening all the windows. Fresh air swept through the rooms, carrying out the smell of strangers. I stripped the bedsheets, washed every cup, and scrubbed the floors. It wasn't about cleaning, it was about reclaiming. Each motion felt like pulling my house back from the hands of those who had tried to erase me. When I reached the study, the room he had locked, I stood for a moment before unlocking it with the new key my lawyer's assistant had arranged for me. The door creaked open slowly, revealing the mess he'd left behind. Papers scattered, drawers half open, empty coffee cups everywhere. It looked less like an office and more like a crime scene, which in truth, it was. On the desk lay an open ledger. The same one my husband used to record our monthly expenses. My son had used it to track his payments, bribes, and fake transfers. Seeing it felt like a knife. My husband's handwriting filled the first half, tidy and precise. My son's filled the rest, messy and greedy. I tore out the pages he'd written and burned them in the fireplace. The flames rose quickly, hungry for his mistakes. I stood there, watching, until only ash remained. Then I began restoring order. I placed my husband's framed photo back on the wall, dusted off the family albums, and replaced every picture my son had hidden. My home started to breathe again. Every corner that had once held deceit was filled with quiet dignity. Later that afternoon, my lawyer called to confirm the next steps. The investigation was moving forward. My son's accounts were frozen, and the forged transfers were officially void. The house was legally and permanently under my name again. No loopholes, no shared claims, no chance of being taken. It was mine, by right and by resilience. That night, I sat in my husband's old armchair by the fireplace. The flames were low now, soft and warm. I thought about everything that had happened. The surgery, the weakness, the betrayal, All of it had led to this moment. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger fades when the truth finally settles. What remained was strength and a strange kind of peace that only comes after surviving something you shouldn't have had to. The next morning, I went outside to the garden. It was overgrown and neglected, weeds everywhere, flowers choked by time. I picked up the tools and started working slowly. Every snip, every pull, every patch of cleared soil reminded me that healing isn't only for people, it's for places too. By the end of the day, the garden looked alive again. The sun felt warmer. The silence no longer hurt. In the days that followed, letters began to arrive from the prison. They were from my son. Apologies written in uneven handwriting, excuses wrapped in regret. I didn't open most of them. The few I did read all said the same thing: that he was sorry, that he didn't mean it, that he wanted forgiveness. But forgiveness isn't a switch. It's a door that only opens when you know it won't hurt you again. And I wasn't ready. So I left the letters unopened in a drawer. They belonged to a past version of him, one that didn't exist anymore. The boy I raised was gone. The man who replaced him had to face the consequences of what he'd done. In the evenings, I would sit by the window with tea, looking out at the garden. Sometimes neighbors waved from across the fence, and I'd smile faintly. They had heard about the police, about the arrest, but no one dared to ask for details. That was fine. I didn't need to explain. I had nothing to hide anymore. The house was quiet again, but this time, it was the kind of quiet I could live with. No secrets, no lies. Just the sound of wind through the curtains and the slow tick of the clock on the wall. I realized then that peace isn't the absence of noise. It's the absence of deceit. The evening light poured softly through the kitchen window, painting the room in shades of gold. I sat with a cup of tea, the same way I had before everything went wrong. Only this time, I wasn't waiting for anyone to come home. The house no longer echoed with footsteps or arguments. It was silent, but not lonely. It was mine again. I thought about everything that had happened: the hospital stay, the betrayal, the forged documents, and the long days of pretending not to notice. The kind of pain that comes from your own child doesn't feel like other pain. It doesn't stab or burn. It sinks. It lives quietly under your ribs until one day it hardens into something else. Resolve. People often think revenge means shouting, fighting, or destroying. But true revenge doesn't need noise. It's in reclaiming what was taken, in standing back up when someone expects you to stay down. That's what I did. I didn't need to ruin my son's life. He did that himself. I only showed the truth to the right people, and truth did the rest. Now, every corner of this house feels like a reminder, not of betrayal, but of endurance. The mantel holds my family photos again. My husband's chair sits by the window, repaired and polished. The garden outside blooms brighter than it has in years. It's strange how peace looks exactly like the life you had before, except quieter, wiser, and less trusting. Sometimes I still get letters from the prison. I don't throw them away, but I don't open them either. I leave them in a box near the fireplace, a box that reminds me where blind love leads. Maybe one day I'll read them. Maybe I won't. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't about saying, "It's fine." It's about knowing you'll never let it happen again. Neighbors still ask me how I manage to stay calm.